welcome to our show. Today we have a very special guest. Ourselves. We'll be discussing the topic of climate change and its effect on the global community.
Hi there. It's great to be here to talk about such an important issue.
So, let's start off by asking, what is climate change?
Climate change refers to the long-term warming of the planet, which is primarily caused by the burning of fossil fuels and the resulting increase in greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This warming is leading to a wide range of impacts, including rising sea levels, more frequent and severe weather events, and changes to ecosystems.
Can you please provide some examples of environmental pollution and its effects on the natural environment and human health?
Environmental pollution can take many forms, such as air and water pollution, loss of biodiversity, and negative impacts on human health, such as respiratory diseases and cancer. It can also disproportionately affect low-income and marginalized communities. One of the most obvious effects of climate change is the rise in global temperatures. This warming is causing the polar ice caps to melt, which is leading to sea level rise. As the oceans get warmer, we are also seeing more frequent and severe storms, such as hurricanes and typhoons. In addition, the warming is causing many species of plants and animals to lose their habitats, which is leading to a loss of biodiversity.
How does environmental pollution disproportionately affect low-income and marginalized communities?
Environmental pollution often disproportionately affects low-income and marginalized communities because these communities are often located near industrial facilities or lack access to clean air and water. Additionally, these communities may not have the resources to advocate for cleaner environments or to address the negative health effects of pollution. The loss of habitat for many species is also affecting the livelihoods of people who depend on those species for food and income. In addition, the increase in extreme weather events is causing damage to infrastructure, such as roads and bridges, which can disrupt transportation and access to essential services. Finally, the rising temperatures and changing weather patterns are leading to water shortages in many parts of the world.
How is climate change impacting the natural environment, including plants and animals?
As the Earth's temperature continues to rise, many species are struggling to adapt to their changing habitats. Some species are migrating to new areas in search of more favorable conditions, while others are going extinct. One of the most significant ways that climate change is impacting plants and animals is by altering their habitats. As the climate changes, many plants and animals are finding it difficult to survive in the places where they have traditionally lived. For example, warmer temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are causing some species to lose their traditional sources of food and shelter. In addition to changing habitats, climate change is also having a major impact on the availability of water. As the climate warms, many areas are experiencing more frequent and intense droughts, which can be devastating for plants and animals that rely on water to survive. At the same time, other areas are experiencing more intense rainfall and flooding, which can also be harmful to many species. Overall, climate change is having a significant and negative impact on the natural environment, and many plants and animals are struggling to adapt to the changing conditions.
How is climate change contributing to natural disasters, such as hurricanes and floods?
Climate change is contributing to natural disasters in a number of ways. As the climate warms, the Earth's atmosphere is able to hold more moisture, which can lead to more intense and frequent rainfall events. This can increase the risk of flooding in many areas. In addition, climate change is also causing sea levels to rise, which can make coastal areas more vulnerable to storm surge and flooding from hurricanes and other tropical storms. Warmer ocean temperatures can also make these storms more intense and destructive. Finally, climate change can also affect the frequency and intensity of other natural disasters, such as droughts, wildfires, and heat waves. For example, warmer temperatures can lead to more severe and prolonged droughts, which can increase the risk of wildfires. And, as the climate warms, heat waves are becoming more common and more intense in many parts of the world, which can be dangerous and deadly, especially for vulnerable populations. Overall, climate change is contributing to an increase in the frequency and severity of natural disasters, which can have devastating impacts on communities and the natural environment.
What are some of the main causes of environmental pollution?
The main causes of environmental pollution include industrial activities, transportation, and household waste.
How is climate change affecting the global community?
Climate change is having a wide range of impacts on people and communities around the world. For example, some areas are experiencing more frequent and intense heat waves, which can be dangerous for vulnerable populations like the elderly and the sick. In other areas, rising sea levels are leading to coastal flooding and the displacement of communities. Additionally, climate change is affecting the availability of natural resources like water and food, which can lead to conflicts and instability.
What are some potential solutions to the problem of environmental pollution?
There are a range of potential solutions to address environmental pollution, such as reducing consumption and waste, promoting sustainable practices, and implementing stricter regulations and enforcement on industrial activities. Individual actions, such as properly disposing of waste and reducing energy consumption, can also make a difference.
What can individuals do to help address climate change?
There are many things that individuals can do to help address climate change. One of the most important things is to reduce our own greenhouse gas emissions by making choices that use less energy, like using public transportation or driving more fuel-efficient cars. We can also support the development of renewable energy sources like solar and wind power, and we can conserve natural resources by reducing our waste and using less water. Reducing consumption and waste, promoting sustainable practices, and implementing stricter regulations and enforcement on industrial activities will all help. Individual actions, such as properly disposing of waste and reducing energy consumption, can also make a difference.
What about governments and businesses? What can they do to address climate change?
Governments and businesses have a crucial role to play in addressing climate change. Governments can implement policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, such as setting emissions standards for vehicles and power plants, and providing incentives for the development of renewable energy sources. Businesses can also take steps to reduce their own emissions and to support the transition to a low-carbon economy. For example, they can invest in renewable energy and energy-efficient technology, and they can work with their supply chain partners to reduce emissions throughout the entire production process.
So it sounds like there are many ways that we can all take action to address climate change. But is it too late to make a difference?
It's important to remember that while the impacts of climate change are already being felt around the world, it's not too late to take action. By reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and supporting the transition to a low-carbon economy, we can slow the pace of climate change and limit the severity of its impacts. While we can't undo the damage that's already been done, we can still make a difference for the future.
What about international cooperation? Is that necessary to address climate change?
Absolutely. Climate change is a global problem that requires global solutions. International cooperation is crucial for coordinating efforts to reduce emissions and support the transition to a low-carbon economy. This can include agreements like the Paris Climate Accord, which brings together countries from around the world to set goals for reducing emissions and to support each other in achieving those goals.
How are different countries and regions around the world being affected by climate change?
Climate change is affecting countries and regions around the world in different ways. Some areas are experiencing the effects of climate change more severely than others, depending on a variety of factors, such as their location, their natural environment, and their economic and political systems. For example, small island nations and low-lying coastal areas are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise and more intense storms. These areas are already experiencing the effects of climate change, including more frequent and severe flooding, as well as the loss of critical coastal habitats and infrastructure. In other parts of the world, such as the Arctic, climate change is causing more rapid and significant changes to the natural environment. As the climate warms, the Arctic is experiencing melting sea ice, thawing permafrost, and other impacts that are affecting the wildlife and the people who live there. Though the impacts of climate change are being felt in different ways around the world, all countries and regions are being affected in some way. As the climate continues to change, it is important for all countries to work together to address the challenges posed by climate change and to find ways to adapt to the changing conditions.
You mentioned the Arctic, and I wanted to ask, how is climate change impacting the Arctic and other fragile ecosystems?
Climate change is having a major impact on the Arctic and other fragile ecosystems. As the Earth's temperature continues to rise, many of these ecosystems are experiencing significant changes that are affecting the plants, animals, and other species that live there. In the Arctic, for example, climate change is causing the sea ice to melt at an accelerating rate. This is having a major impact on the wildlife that relies on the sea ice for habitat, such as polar bears and seals. As the sea ice disappears, these animals are losing their traditional sources of food and shelter, which is putting their populations at risk. In other fragile ecosystems, such as coral reefs and rainforests, climate change is also having a major impact. Warmer water temperatures and more acidic oceans are causing coral reefs to bleach and die, which is devastating for the many species that rely on these ecosystems for habitat. And in rainforests, warmer temperatures and changing precipitation patterns are affecting the plants and animals that live there. Many of the species that live in the Arctic and other fragile ecosystems are struggling to adapt to the changing conditions. These impacts are not only a threat to the plants and animals that live in these ecosystems, but they also have broader consequences for the global environment and for human societies.
How does climate change intersect with other global issues, such as inequality and political conflict?
As the climate changes, it can exacerbate existing inequalities and create new ones, as well as contribute to political tensions and conflicts. One of the ways that climate change intersects with inequality is by disproportionately affecting marginalized and vulnerable communities. As mentioned earlier, these communities often have less access to resources and are more exposed to the impacts of climate change, such as more frequent and severe natural disasters, loss of access to clean water and food, and other challenges. This can make it more difficult for these communities to adapt to the changing climate and can widen existing inequalities. In addition, climate change can also contribute to political tensions and conflicts. As the impacts of climate change become more severe, there may be competition for resources, such as water and land, and this can lead to conflicts between communities and even between countries. Climate change can also create new security threats and challenges, such as the risk of mass migration and the potential for conflict over the control of natural resources. Overall, climate change intersects with many other global issues and can have significant impacts on inequality and political conflict. It is important for governments, organizations, and individuals to consider these intersections and to work together to address the challenges posed by climate change.
How are indigenous communities and traditional ways of life being impacted by climate change?
Indigenous communities and traditional ways of life are being heavily impacted by climate change. As the climate changes, many of these communities are experiencing the impacts in a variety of ways, including loss of access to traditional resources, damage to cultural heritage sites, and other challenges. One of the ways that indigenous communities are being impacted by climate change is through the loss of access to traditional resources. As the climate changes, many of the plants, animals, and other natural resources that these communities rely on are becoming less abundant or more difficult to access. This can make it difficult for these communities to maintain their traditional ways of life and can threaten their cultural and spiritual connections to the land. In addition, climate change is also causing damage to many of the cultural heritage sites that are important to indigenous communities. For example, rising sea levels and more intense storms are threatening many coastal heritage sites, while warming temperatures and more frequent wildfires are damaging sites in other parts of the world. In short, indigenous communities and traditional ways of life are being heavily impacted by climate change, and these impacts are a threat to the cultural and spiritual connections that these communities have to the land. It is important for governments, organizations, and individuals to recognize and support the rights and needs of these communities as they face the challenges posed by climate change.
How does addressing environmental pollution also benefit the economy?
Addressing environmental pollution can also have economic benefits. For example, investing in clean technology and infrastructure can create jobs and stimulate economic growth. Additionally, reducing pollution can improve public health, which can lead to reduced healthcare costs and increased productivity.
How can addressing environmental pollution also benefit public health?
Addressing environmental pollution can have significant benefits for public health.
Reducing air and water pollution can improve respiratory and cardiovascular health and can reduce the risk of certain diseases, such as cancer.
Investing in clean technologies and infrastructure can also create healthier environments for communities, which can improve overall health and well-being.
Can you discuss some of the long-term consequences of inaction on environmental pollution?
The long-term consequences of inaction on environmental pollution can be severe. Continued pollution can lead to the degradation of natural environments, such as forests and waterways, which can have negative impacts on biodiversity and the overall health of the planet. It can also have long-term negative effects on human health, such as increased rates of respiratory and cardiovascular diseases.
How can we raise awareness about environmental pollution and its impacts?
Raising awareness about environmental pollution and its impacts is essential in addressing this issue. This can be done through education and outreach efforts, such as public campaigns and community events, as well as through media coverage and online platforms. By raising awareness, we can encourage individuals, businesses, and governments to take action to reduce pollution and protect the environment.
How can technology play a role in addressing environmental pollution?
Technology can play a key role in addressing environmental pollution. Clean technologies, such as renewable energy sources and advanced waste management systems, can help reduce pollution and minimize the negative impacts on the environment. Additionally, technology can support efforts to monitor and track pollution levels, which can help inform policy and decision-making.
Can you discuss some of the benefits of addressing environmental pollution?
Addressing environmental pollution can have many benefits, both for the environment and for human health. It can improve air and water quality, protect natural habitats and biodiversity, and reduce the negative health impacts of pollution. Additionally, it can support economic growth and job creation, and can improve overall quality of life for communities.
What are some of the challenges to addressing climate change?
There are many challenges to addressing climate change. One of the biggest challenges is the fact that reducing greenhouse gas emissions can be expensive and disruptive to existing industries. This can make it difficult for governments and businesses to take the necessary steps to transition to a low-carbon economy. Additionally, there can be resistance to change from individuals and groups who are invested in the status quo. Overcoming these challenges will require political will, innovation, and collaboration.
How can addressing environmental pollution also benefit future generations?
Addressing environmental pollution can have long-term benefits for future generations. By protecting the natural environment and reducing pollution, we can ensure that future generations have access to clean air and water and can enjoy the benefits of a healthy and diverse planet. Additionally, addressing pollution can help mitigate the impacts of climate change, which can have far-reaching consequences for future generations.
Finally, what gives you hope that we can address climate change?
There are many things that give me hope that we can address climate change.
One is the fact that we already have many of the technologies and solutions that we need to transition to a low-carbon economy.
For example, renewable energy sources like solar and wind power are becoming more and more cost-effective, and we're seeing more and more businesses and governments taking action to reduce their emissions. Additionally, I'm encouraged by the growing awareness and concern about climate change among the general public, which is leading to more pressure on decision makers to take action.
Thank you for your insights on this important topic. To our listeners, please consider taking action to reduce your own impact on the environment. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. This is the end of the show.